to give you some color around what's going on in the industry with regard to members behaving badly, and it's increasing at an increasing rate, as club benchmarking would call it. So Bob and I will try to pitch and catch on this topic a little bit. We'll try to be efficient in time. We might ask for a couple of anecdotal stories from the crowd. But here we go.
Thank you, Dan. Is my working all right too? Thank you. And thanks to Ken, because he set up a lot of what we're talking about. He talked about these conflicts and age-related and stuff like that, and you're going to find from some of the stuff we presented, a lot has to do with age, and sometimes not. So anyway, I'm going to advance the slide here a little bit.
Buzz through these, pretty much. We can buzz through these because we have an incredible introduction.
There you go. Yeah, I think so. But with the copy, they have a copy of this on the desk.
Right, right.
Sleep over this if they don't fall asleep now. So anyway, our topic basically is about high maintenance members, and so as was explained, we do a lot of governance work, we do a lot of retreats, we do a lot of search, especially search, and so we have a lot of exposure to boards, to presidents, to management, and it's become quite obvious over the years that the discipline issue is a significant one in clubs, and it's not getting better. People thought that for a while it was COVID and everything was fine, and you'll see from our statistics that actually COVID made a difference in mental health, but it's subsequent to that, it's just as bad. And you all can think of why that might be, given that we have all these issues having to do with taxation and political issues that are on the news, and war, and supply chain, and labor shortages, and all those sorts of things. And so they continue to cause stress, and so we'll talk about it. Anyway, so we have a few articles that are on your thumb drive in addition to this presentation on the subject. So if you want a little more reading on it, go to it. So here we are. The subject again, members behaving badly. And so I want to talk with some of the issues of conflict and some of the means by which clubs need to deal with it. So normally, if you've seen some of the stuff we do in NCA Club Director and webinars, you'll see that we do a little tit for tat here. We'll try and be more gentlemanly.
Today we will.
Thanks. Yeah. I think so. Open with the question: is this a problem? And so I think, Dan, you mentioned earlier, maybe we should get a show of hands. How many officers do we have here? And how many managers? And so if you're a member, director, leadership position other than management, would you just raise your hand? Excellent. Okay. And so the others, I'm going to assume, are part of management. Barry, you can raise your hand for everybody. So we'll get him right up front. For those of you that are sitting at the same table with the opposite, the leader and manager, would you just sort of cast an eye to them and ponder the question, is member misbehavior a problem at your club? And so maybe have a different perspective, or maybe you don't, but if you sort of look in each other's eyes, you might see whether there's conflict there or whether we're all on the same page. But nonetheless, what we found it to be is a problem for most. And so we did a survey. It was 50 iconic clubs across the country. And we have put together this small survey, or portions of the survey, just on this particular topic. So I just want to breeze through some of these. So do you and/or your board members consider the frequency and severity of outspoken members a problem? And so we see here that some 28% said no, but some 72. But Dan went to grad school again, and so I did go to a different school. So 72% of respondents to the survey said either somewhat or considerably. And so that's a big percentage, and I suspect that if we were to take a poll of this group, we'd probably find that to be somewhat similar. Next question is the number or level of the disruption greater than before the pandemic? And so again, we've got some no's, and it's probably the same no's that don't think they have a problem. And I guess this is a matter of severity, and so some of those no's maybe, we don't have a problem. We just live with it, and so we wouldn't raise our hand and say yes, but I dare say that just about everybody must have a problem, except for some very, very exclusive kind of clubs along the way that are tightly controlled. So,
and they're all in the room, Bob. They're all in the room. Every one of those exclusive clubs are in the room. But when chatting about this topic and looking at the survey data and the anecdotal data, the comments, it was clear that there's almost a Stockholm syndrome thing going on here, that clubs, be it managers or administrators, are just more tolerant of bad behavior, right? So has our standard gone down because we needed the revenue back then? We'll get to that in a bit, but the argument in 2008, we have data back from then, and just pre-COVID was, hey, we need more members, are we lowering our standards? And it feels like the tide has changed, and we'll talk about that as well.
So, next quick slide. Do you believe that your staff are more stressed by high maintenance members today than before the pandemic? And so once again, we get a considerable number of people, 2/3 of them saying that yes, that's the fact. And so I don't think anybody is particularly surprised, I guess, at employees being stressed, because everybody seems to be stressed these days. But the problem at clubs and stressing makes it a difficulty, and certainly in our job and our work, where we're trying to find good fits and the right fit between executive levels in particular and the club. And so what the nature of the club is and its culture is really important, and that's where we ask these questions, and we want to find the right fit. When you find clubs where the culture of civility just doesn't exist, it's a harder job to place. And there's a lot of clubs, not necessarily in our immediate area, that it's hard to find people because the word is out. People understand that the club is just dysfunctional. And somebody steps into it, they're stepping into a hornet's nest. So it's important to understand where your culture, the impact it has on staffing, and that simply goes down the line. When we do a lot of temporary seasonal employees, the overseas people, many of them come up from Florida, they've already worked and been trained in southern clubs, and when they get up here, or before they get up here, they're talking with their roommates and they're talking with people around them and finding out what kind of a club. If they've got options, which they do, they're interested in what the culture of the club is. How do you treat your staff, and what's the atmosphere there? So in order to attract good seasonal employees, that's also an important consideration. How do your staff feel about it? So, and let's see now. Member complaints or problem members' behavior. Or do you have a grievance committee? So this question is, do you have a grievance committee? And so many clubs have specific committees in order to handle that. And you'll see on the next page that there are a number of people that live here. If you don't have a grievance committee, how is it handled? And so the general manager, we'll talk about that in a little while, general manager often gets put in the role of having to deal with grievance and problems and misbehavior. And typically that's at some level or another that gets beyond that, it's a problem. But the executive committee often is the grievance committee, because there's no formal committee per se. And you see that there's nothing for the president, and we find that for the most part, the president is involved in it very heavily, but doesn't get involved in the actual adjudication of these issues. And so people, they put nothing for the president. And lastly, we talked about contested elections. And so in this case, there's sort of two approaches to it. One, modern club governance has, for the most part, moved towards a slate of new officers by the nominating committee, and it's a set slate. You vote for the slate. You don't have options. It's not pick the best 6 out of 4 or whatever it is, or 4 out of 6. And you may or may not have an actual opposition slate. And do you have the ability for petitions to be made and new candidates introduced? And so make a point out of this, for mainly the main purpose, is that contested elections are clearly a source of conflict within clubs. And so all the politicking that goes on around it, the elections itself, the repercussions afterwards, and so this modern idea that you have a legislate that vote on in or out is taking hold. Yet there's still a lot of people that believe, for giving the members some opportunity that they need to have the ability to do some petitioning. But those petitioning should not be, 10 people. It needs to be substantial in order to create a problem. So,
a couple of points. One, in Florida, California, and some other states with gated communities, HOA, POA, there's pretty rigorous laws about open debate about who's running for the board, access to board minutes. Is there really an executive committee? Again, Florida, California, a couple other states are incredibly arduous about that. But the survey results really argued the best and brightest are not going to campaign for a role on the board, right? The people you really need on your board are generally not going to raise their hand like this. They might raise it a little bit like that. So that's not just a trend in not-for-profit governance, but you can find really great resources on from the NCA, which again I was chairman of, but the Center for Nonprofit Boards, Board Source. There's lots of think tanks that can give you good data that these are not just anecdotal things we learned traveling around the country. These are facts that the best and brightest run for a role in an environment like many clubs.
So NCA recently did a small poll survey asking about children of members and whether that's an issue for staff. And these are basically the results. Unfortunately, they show that kids are a problem, and members' children are this day and age a more significant problem in terms of how you handle them. We all know that we've got a lot of parents that don't want you talking to their kids. They take total responsibility. And that, for some reason, in keeping the way a club should be anyway. So if your child is misbehaving, the member is responsible for their spouse, for their children, for their guests. And so you address it right from the top. Little things, certainly around the pool, you're splashing too much, you got lifeguards with whistles, and so that's to be expected. But sometimes it gets out of hand, theft and things of that nature, and physical, and it can't be tolerated, and so you need to have that in your consideration of what kind of policies you might have. So here, probably can't read that, and so this is just a list of the write-ins for the same people that took this survey, and for the most part, it talks about how things have or haven't changed since COVID. It talks about what generations, who are the problems, and I'll just go to the second slide here where hopefully you can read it. So this first slide is from a club where they say, we're doing everything right. We have a wait list. We have surveys where the members are rating us very, very highly, so everybody loves the club. We have disciplinary procedures, and we have disciplined a number of people. We've suspended a few. We've even let a few go. But even so, the underlying complaint culture is driving the employees in particular crazy. And so that's an issue into itself. So today we don't have to deal only with major complaints where you're doing damage or physical violence or whatever. We'll talk about the complaint side of it and how damaging that is to clubs today. And so the second one down there addresses it and says, basically, in this case, they think it's the younger people, and they say they're entitled, they're somewhat disrespectful, they expect their every demand to be met, they're not too careful about the rules. There's a lot of wiggle room in the rules, and so that may be a good summation of millennial generation, and so clubs aren't immune to that. And certainly the clubs that have legacy programs are bringing in basically the children of members are in a much better situation than when you're bringing in people from the outside that are not familiar with their culture or not with members of the club. So, but the bottom line on all of this is that if you put all of those previous responses in, it's all over the board, and older people blame the younger people blame the older people, men, the women, the men, and so it doesn't have any clear pattern, even though that one person said that it was all the millennials. And the problem basically is People feel more entitled than they ever did. They feel that outspokenness is acceptable more than they ever did. They feel that they're disrespectful more than ever before, so they're disrespectful to staff, to leadership, of membership, and to the rules. And so that's a common theme throughout this all, and hopefully it's not a common theme at your club yet. But this is something that you've got to really tackle in its very early stages, because it can end up to be a problem. And I have this on the side here that civility is so important to the culture of the club. And if you keep that in mind, if that really is your overriding mission statement for the club, then how do you maintain civility in the club? And so here some ideas. Are they from where you stand for the most part? Because I don't want to read over things per se. I'll skip things. I just will show this little part of the slide on the side, this little quote about where mental health issues. Mental health issues are a growing problem, and it shows here that it's increased just the last couple of years, but it's increasing from before COVID, and it was down around 31% pre-COVID days. And NCA and even with MTA has dealt with some issues having to do with discipline, misbehavior over the years. And so it's a problem that's always existed, but it seems to be getting worse, and it's creeping up point by point. And the same statistics said that the millennials, for the most part, 50% of the people have some kind of mental health issues. And so that's depression, that's anxiety, it's stress, and again, the reasons are multifold, but if it's growing and growing, you know that exists in your club, and how do we deal with it? So one of the things, okay, see, Barry. Yeah.
So Barry's question was, is there a change, a trend line in the tenure and turnover rate of board members? Yeah, you can.
So, I guess, we see it so all over the mark. I mean,
well, one that comes to mind is, and it's anecdotal, Barry, sorry, it's board president terms going from 1 year to 3 years. More mirroring their tenure on the board, and then board terms are getting extended. The average tenure for a public company board is 9 years. The average tenure for a chief executive in a public company is about 9 years. Ironically, the turnover rate, this is hard data, in our industry is 1 to 3 years on a board member, and the turnover rate statistically from CMAA is 3.7 years on a GM. So you could sort of analog to me, right? The turnover rate of board members is consistent with the turnover rate, or by and large, with board, with general managers. So it feels like it's extending a bit, in part because there's more stability, probably less talent in the ranks of volunteerism.
And in some of the governance that we've done, especially recently, where they had short terms, 1 3-year term for the board, then you're out. We're trying to convince them to take those into at least two consecutive terms, if possible, possibly even 3, and get some continuity. And so that last slide or last statement really is about having some continuity in leadership, especially if you're going to make some changes. Because if you've got things always changing, when you're going to institute new policies and how they're not going to change over time. So you need board members to get in, you need officers that have been there for a couple, 3 years, or a process by which they can be extended rather than having an automatic 1 year and out. And so, you hit the ground running, and before you know it, your term is over. And so it's almost a lame duck kind of situation. And it's not good for the overall structure of the club. So.
What about the size of boards? Do you see any trends in increasing the size of boards?
So there's hard data on that too. Again, NCA and Board Source, 9 to 11 is the absolute sweet spot. Unless you're building a club from zero, where you need a big board to rally new members, and you don't adage is it's not the first 100 members, it's the last 100 members. 9 to 11, again, statistically in our industry, is right there. A lot of grins in the room. Is that, oh, he's writing it down. He's got 24 people on the board.
Yeah, too many.
There's too many.
21. 21, yeah.
So, you need a lot of consulting.
And are there means to gradually get out of that? You know, you can pare it down over time.
Triple staggered board is actually a little, I'm not sure if it'll be live by the time it gets down to the right number.
I bet you will. But you look healthy. So a point on the prior slide, Bob had 2 entitled, 2 outspoken, 2 disrespectful. There's hard data. Again, we love surveys. We do 40 or so a year. Members that are under 50 join a club because they're joining a facility. They're joining because they think they're joining a private resort. Members over 50, statistically, believe there is a private ownership, not explicitly, but it was a privilege to get into the club. So the behavior analog there is if you're under 50 and you think you're at the Boca Resort, then you're not. And there's a different standard, but that's the behavior is manifested by this headset that is challenging for, I know many of the club managers, this is no fun for an employee to confront.
So Dan, we'll have to move this thing along and you decide here to talk about.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So the big takeaway on this one for me, the stability thing that Bob framed up, but high maintenance members, there are ways to get after this today. And a lot of the best clubs, many of which in this room use, is background checks, right? Aside from me knowing you as your neighbor and we're buddies, do you do background checks? You outsource background checks in the standard way, but high-end clubs that we serve in the Rocky Mountains, they don't do just a criminal background check, they look for civil action. Because a lot of rich people like to solve their problems with civil actions. And you might want those people in your club, most clubs don't. Another background check is having the GM pick up the phone and calling the clubs and asking, how are these potential members, are they nice to our members? Are they nice to our staff? And then the third one, which you can do anecdotally, but you can use a firm we do in terms of background checks, is social media checking. What do they blog about? Where are they on the internet? What do they say? And that can really give you some insight in terms of preemptively who's going to get in the club. And so I know many clubs don't use the black box anymore, but do you really want to escalate a background person that's got plenty of dough, but might not culturally fit within the organization? So tactically, there's some tools that you can use. Yes?
So we've done the background checks where we've implemented that. The other thing we've done is we've just basically told sponsors, if you bring somebody in, you're responsible, it's going to reflect on you. We have way too many people. We were getting into a place where people were sponsoring prospective members who they really didn't know that well. And so we sort of finally said, enough's enough. So that guy that got 69% of the poll, I don't know if he'd get into our club. He may get elected president, but he wouldn't get into our club.
I know.
So many clubs are in the enviable position now that they've got wait lists, their membership is full, and so you have an opportunity, to really do some really deep dives on what members are like and how they behave. Some clubs have already, will continue to do, will have a sort of a probationary period. You become a member, but your probation maybe for the first 3 years. And if some major, incident happens, that you can be removed. And so they maintain some control even after the fact, because it's so really hard to find out what people's true colors are. And we always found that, at 3 years, a member behaved himself basically for 3 years. And by the 4th year, they suddenly were empowered and they were part of the old guard and changed their attitude on so many things. And I'm sure others of you have seen that along the way. So it's a question of the back.
Yeah, question, should the management be taking care of this discipline or the board? And the second question was, how do you avoid being the discipline police and trying to press down on it without being viewed as overzealous?
He just keyed us up. He's my Edmund man. He just keyed us up. Great. Yeah. No, so we're going to absolutely cover those things. There's some structure, there's some culture stuff, but
Let's talk about complaints.
let's jump there.
No, already complaints. Remember complaints. And so, you know, we talk about discipline and all those sort of things, but the fundamental problem, and often from the very low end, is you have a complaint culture. And if your club has a complaint culture, that's the beginning of member misbehavior. And I know I see a lot of smiling faces here, and so doesn't everybody have a complaint culture? Well, some worse than others, and you got to deal with, you know, how significant it is. And so, so put up a few things. You know, what's the response, or what happens as a result of a complaint counselor? And I mentioned before about, you know, the stress on the staff and that sort of thing. And so, you know, complaints are contagious, and they spread quickly, and they are difficult for just about everybody, leadership. And so, what kind of complaints do you allow, and what kind of complaints don't you allow? And for the most part, we're suggesting that you brush off that old suggestion box, you know, the one that doesn't have a slit in it, it just sits there suggestions, or it's on the highest part of your trophy cabinet that you can't reach, or it's out on the 10th hole or something, you know, because we don't really want suggestions, but you need to have a mechanism by where people can vent their complaints. So it needs, you know, complaints need to be handled as locally as possible and as fast and expediently as possible. And so your culture really should be, and your officers should, and management, and upper management for that most part, should be prepared to redirect complaints. If you have a problem with the soup, don't wait till the next board meeting and do a gotcha. You know, you've been waiting because now you have something to say at a board meeting. And we know board members that do that. And you don't need to wait till the House Committee meets either. You know, it should be you contact the captain, HOD, host, or whatever it is, right there and then, and tell your problem. And you don't storm into the kitchen and throw the soup at the chef or anything like that. You know? And these are, you know, real life kind of things that happen. So when we talk about what your policy is going to be, and how you're going to get that culture going, that's one step for sure, is to try and nip these things in the bud.
But a pattern there, everybody, is it's not great when the House Chairman comes and says, you know, Bob had a bad meal last night. The committee should be looking for pattern synthesis to escalate a pattern of the bad cheeseburger kind of deal. So the one-up anecdotal complaint is, okay, we have technology to address that. You know, there's lots of survey platforms that are in the moment. But you're looking for a theme or a behavior change that you need to deal with. So the frustration of tolerating that complaint culture is not cool. More sophisticated clubs and the clubs that participate in our survey are really good at shaping the behavioral narrative, are shaping using social media, communication with how great the club is, and you better get on the boat kind of deal. Because there's a lot of good stuff that goes on at clubs. Average club serves, I don't know, 500,000 meals a year, probably Westchester, and probably 98% were pretty darn good, right? So shaping that narrative through social media, good communication, can really save a lot of anecdotal degradation of just behavior.
And it's, you know, a tremendous waste of time for officers and committee chairs and people like that for stuff that's just, you know, simply just complaints. And you probably read that thing that the average American complains 30 times a day. I've had that for a while, that as a quote, and so I tried to get AI to give me an update for, you know, as of yesterday, and they haven't changed it. So things aren't changing. We're all in the same boat together. So sources and reasons, and there's a lot of reasons. Ken mentioned, you know, construction. You know, older members, they don't want new projects for the most part. You know, they want to pay for them. They don't want to be disrupted. They think, I got a couple more years in this club, you know, and I don't want the golf course to be, you know, under construction. And so it used to be that clubs and club members were particularly concerned about their kids and grandkids, and so they would do things for their legacies. Not so in a number of years. You know, that just is not their thinking anymore. It's what's in it for me now, and if they don't like it, they're going to politic against those projects. And so those are, of course, price increases, all forced with price increases. And again, nobody wants to see the dues increase. Nobody wants to see the price of the dining room increase. But meanwhile, we have to pay staff more, and you know, it's actually salaries, the cost of goods, and things like that. So that's a cause of stress as well. And it is just in with the retirees table. It says, you know, you answer that one for yourself. Is that a source of complaints anywhere? I think Dan doesn't think so, or do you think so?
Whatever you say that. Yeah.
So don't let complaints fester. I'm going to just sort of breeze through here. You get a chance really sort of see it up top. And so again, the gotcha situation, handle it immediately, whatever it is. And if you have to deflect certain complaints, you deflect it. So say, yes, we're handling that. You know, when you get caught, we're coming off the 18th green, and somebody wants to complain about the greens on the 17th. It's like, you know, we understand that. Thank you. If this is important to you, put it in writing to the executive committee or the green committee. So great deflection. Put it in writing. As soon as you put it in writing, the complaint goes away. Well, it doesn't go away. They complain amongst their foursome, but it takes everyone off the hook. It's not important. If it is important, you want to direct them to the right people along the way. And so that takes a little bit of training and an understanding of your policies and procedures, who's responsible for what. And so we're not suggesting, nor do we find it very practical, to have committees do disciplinary kind of procedures and handle major complaints. Yes, they should handle, grounds committee should hear about, you know, condition of the rough and greens and things like that. And the golf committee should know about, you know, tournaments taking up too many tee times and handicap issues and things like that. Those shouldn't be elevated. Most of the stuff doesn't elevate to that level. But when it starts to get to be serious, behavioral issues in particular, then it's got to be elevated. And it should come through basically through the general manager as a clearinghouse. And that goes typically to the president of the club, who doesn't adjudicate the problem as much as evaluate whether it's serious enough, whether it could be just a Dutch uncle kind of situation where you take your side, and I know this is the first time you've done this, but it's not acceptable behavior, and we're all friends, and you hope it never happens again. A lot of the problems are at that level, even for the general manager to do that. And so when we had a prior slide, the general manager's role in that. General manager sees it right early, and you want your staff also to identify problems and problem people early and stop them or see if you can help them at that level before it gets escalated. So, but if it does, it's got to be a process. And do you have a disciplinary committee, or is this all handled by the executive committee, for example? So, I think I can. Oh, I'm not going to go through that. That was you, Dan.
No, you're close. I'll say it more succinctly. Okay.
All right.
So the industry's at an inflection point, and lots of boards struggle with this. And we go around the country visiting clubs, but given we're almost full, or most of us are full, most boards are reluctant to leverage that. You know, put a stake in the ground. Sometimes you've got to be a hard ass. Sometimes you've got to marginalize your buddies or throw them out of the club. And lots of clubs just don't want to do that because we're a social machine, right? We're all pals. So, you know, leveraging the fact that we're suffering from success as an industry and creating a standard is no fun for volunteers because all your buddies are members of clubs. And it's no fun for general managers because they frankly say, boy, who am I going to irritate that's my next board member? And are they going to be doing my next agreement? And how durable is my cut clause? Those are the things that really go through good GMs, and that's what causes them to sometimes say, you know what, I'm not going to confront Mr. Gotrox because Mr. Gotrox has too many friends on the board. So this needs to be a partnership, and Bob will touch on it, or one of us will touch on the fact that the general manager should absolutely own behavioral issues with the staff. That's absolutely not your place as a board member, but boy, general managers can partner with board members to solve for certain member behavioral issues. But there's a reluctance there by paid staff because they need a job by and large. So again, that's sort of an inflection point in our industry where now that we're full, this is not 2008, this is not pre-COVID, you've got more leverage as board members and GMs than you might want to leverage.
And just talking maybe, I advanced the slides a little bit here, Dana, just to move along, but talking about the legal aspect, and members and the club is not immune to to potentially suits for the behavior of members as well, right?
So the legal standard today, this is very different than 30 years ago, or Barry, when you got into business 50 years ago. So the standard is much more heightened, right? You've got to look for in your D&O insurance, are there prior acts exclusions, right? Did the board 10 years ago screw up on something, and now I'm going to own it, either as manager or a board member? Or, boy, the legal standard of when clubs don't get sued anymore, we all get sued as board members, right? So you have a heightened standard of how members comport themselves and how you hold HR confidential. That's a huge issue that we run into. So these things aren't in the old days, it was just kind of fun to be on a board. Now, today, there's 2 websites you should follow. We can share those with you. There's one attorney that just tracks lawsuits in the private club industry. And they are incredibly funny to read, sad, and expensive. So you don't want to be on the front end of those deals. But the standard of applying these disciplines or confidentiality or whistleblower, these are real standards that we all have to be appreciative of, and even though they're not terribly sexy.
So Dan, we're really just coming up to the last minutes or so. And is there any summation in particular that you like to handle? That once again on your thumb drive, this complete presentation is there, plus additional articles and things. And so we've skipped around a little bit, but you certainly understand the discipline in which we talked about, who should enforce, and that side of it.
No, in the spirit of time.
Okay. So final concluding remarks on this is that civility slips away, very slowly when you're not watching, but you can't, get it back real easy. And so you really, boards have to take the position, leadership and management, to watch what the status of your club is, of the behavior of members, and then see that in fact you nip things in the bud, because it's just, like I said, turning around at the end. And if you don't do it now, when you're in a good position to discipline and suspend and whatever members, what are you going to do at the harder times along the way? So we have just a real quick little survey thing that Dan will give you about a minute on, to those that are worried. We've been told that they won't start serving lunch until quarter after, so if we could just hold your attention for a second or two. And so,
Right. So many of us in the industry, on the government side or the management side, hear about workforce housing. Workforce housing is just an endemic global issue for us in hospitality, maybe every industry, but hospitality especially. So we recently surveyed, I think about 3,000 general managers and board governance people about employee housing. And so we're just wrapping up the data set this week. I think we had well over 250, it might be north of 300 respondents now from all around the world, including 2 from New Zealand, but many states are reflected. New York and Florida were the highest response rates. And I'll just touch on a few things. So we're going to write some white papers on this for NCA and boardroom, but just a couple of key things. Housing is more needed than ever, even with clubs that have a lot of employee housing. 55% of the clubs don't provide it right now, mostly because of the capital costs. Just the acquisition of a stabilized place where you can put your staff isn't as sexy as the newer short game or pickleball facility, that kind of thing. So single rooms or dormitory style housing is most needed. I was stunned by the data that lots of clubs provide year-round housing, not just J1, H2B, but a lot of year-round, including senior management. Let's see, yeah, 60% were year-round. Capital cost is a big one. And then I won't go through all the data yet, but the creative solutions were really interesting to read. Some of which we actually helped with. We helped 2 clubs figure out how to buy a hotel, motel, and then repurpose it. And, capital model worked really easily there. But boy, creative solutions from teeny houses to getting dormitory space in schools if it worked at the right time. But this is a really endemic issue that we were just hearing more about, and hopefully the white paper will give you a lot more color by region. Those that responded to the survey are going to get the detailed set of data, but globally we'll have some more findings on that. But it ends up being the capital cost and access to the housing that are the real impediments for most clubs to handle.
So, once again, these are all in the handout, but one of the things that's not in, which I thought was particularly interesting, how a club at the end of Long Island solved their problem. They bought the nudist colony that was next door and cleared it out and made it staff housing. So if you happen to have some opportunities like that in your particular part of the country, it's a pretty good idea. It sort of kills two birds with one stone if you're not there. So, Dan,
I don't know how to react to that, but we should do more work for nudist colonies.
you never know where you get your next job from, right?
Any questions real quick, or let's go play golf?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
quick question. I'm surprised in talking about behavior and particularly bad behavior at clubs that the word alcohol hasn't come up once yet. And I know a lot of clubs struggle with behavior on the golf course as it relates to people drinking too much, the accessibility that clubs allow for their members to obtain alcohol on the club. I know some clubs stop, and we're one of them, stopped delivering alcohol to those members on the golf course. Do you guys have any of that in your studies, or does that ever come up? I'm sure it must, unless it's like an elephant in the room that doesn't want to be spoken about because we all enjoy our cocktails. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with behavior at clubs. And is that part of the study, or?
It feels like I can react differently, or differently. It feels like alcohol-related issues are more black and white than ever, and HR-related issues between members and staff are more black and white than ever. So I don't want to see zero tolerance question in terms of delivery of alcohol on the golf course, but it feels like member comportment issues around those HR issues and alcohol are just dealt with much more aggressively today. So it didn't manifest itself in this most recent survey, though.
But once again, if that's a problem for you, for your club, then on a board level, you've got to decide what your rules and regulations are going to be. You don't push this necessarily down to House Committee or Golf Committee or whatever, because this is a big picture kind of an issue. And so you've got to find ways to mitigate it, whether it means canceling the drinks at the halfway house or limiting on the number of beers that you can buy or whatever the case may be. Or God forbid, eliminate the beverage fund.
We're building a policy around one or two infractors.
Other questions?
Yeah, have you spoken to the professional agencies about this too, like the PGA of America, the PGA Tour? Because when you go on Instagram, if you go looking, it is fraught with terrible behavior on the golf course that people see for dress, behavior stuff, and by the way, they're all PGA. A lot of these sites are PGA affiliated or approved by the PGA. I mean, as clubs looking for new members and people coming in, I think we have more people coming into clubs that aren't real golfers, that are new to golf, and they see this kind of stuff on Instagram and stuff like that. I think that's a huge problem too, and I think that the leadership of golf in this country should probably look at what they sanction and what they, growing the game is one thing, but how you grow the game is something else.
Well, and you hit an important concept, and that is that it used to be whatever happened at a club stayed in the club, but now everybody's taking videos of it and they're posting it, whatever. And so if you're concerned about your brand and your reputation, you've got to make sure that you've got a pretty clean house, and you've got to, bring the people to task that might violate that, either publicize of bad behavior, or in fact are guilty of it. So that sort of stuff just goes out virally, and again, it all comes back to tarnishing reputation.
It feels like a lot of PGA professionals that we know, with a bunch of pro searches lately, they feel like they're almost siloed in this plight against solving for the bad behavior, and where's my partner, where's my GM, where's my board, where's my golf gym? I'm not surprised you surfaced that in reference to the PGA model pro struggling with that.
And that sort of goes back also to making sure that department managers in particular know what your rules and policies, and also the ones that will, forward those issues up, because they're the first line to see much of the stuff. And again, nipping the stuff in the bud is so important. And so they should be part of your overall policy plans in order to guarantee that you have a civil place and members behave properly. So.
All right, let's
We ready for
move on.
lunch?
Let's play golf. Let's play golf, all right? Sit under 100.
Thank you very much.